they were defeated militarily, but because their objectives were not achieved.
Like this war. Cameron's got no objectives. He doesn't know
There
what
are
he's doing,
objectives.
okay?
Why did the British why was the British Parliament jump-started into supporting dropping bombs on Iraq?
Because there's career politicians.
The excuse was the propaganda piece about heads being chopped off. But
ISIS have been doing it for 3 years in Syria. And
the French had started bombing Iraq last week,
Yes, good for
before the British.
Yes,
So why are the French and the British not collaborating?
because we don't.
Not only the French and the British,
You can't trust the frogs.
we can't trust the frogs, the gentleman here says. Of course, not only can we not trust the frogs, as the gentleman says,
So
we
eloquently,
can't trust the Scots,
No.
right?
They're whinging.
Right? We can't trust them to make a decision on their own.
They did make
The whole of Westminster and big business
Yes.
uniting together to tell them that if you vote for independence, the economy will collapse and 1 million people will lose their jobs.
They would have been
Right?
a shithole. if
That was the argument.
The Scots
So-
are stupid. Don't start on the Scots.
the Scots are
The
stupid.
point is not about the
They're
Scots.
well-faced.
As well as the Muslims.
The point is not about the Scots.
Scots are-
The point
they've
is
got
about
Scots, okay?
the internal cohesion of the British state
They've been wearing skirts for too long, I think.
and
That's
its
right.
international
And the Celts are invented by the
objectives
English.
and reach. Why is it that the French and the British are going in separately, with separate aims, separate objectives, separate alliances?
Because they're independent countries.
Because
They don't
we are
trust the
seeing the breakdown of the old world order and the birth of a new world order. And as the breakdown of the old world order happens, the alliances and bonds which held nations together, which organised global alliances, which organised world economic power, which organised military alliances, and which held together the individual nation states internally, both between the nationalities, between the religions, and between the regions, and between the classes.
Yes, but it's a more.
All these internal bonds bound together during periods of economic expansion, when everybody's getting better off together, break down during prolonged periods of economic crisis and contraction, such as we have seen since 2007, 2008.
That may be true, but the problem is now we've got a Muslim problem in the Middle East, and they've got to solve it. Okay.
The gentleman here says we have a Muslim problem.
Well, the Muslims, we don't.
ISIS,
Okay?
ISIS, or better said, the Islamic State,
Yes.
receives hundreds of millions of US dollars from the Saudi Arabians and the Kuwaitis.
Exactly. So they're
They are our closest allies
No, they're not.
in the Middle East.
No, they're not.
Our closest
Free
allies.
Syrian army in Syria.
Now, 1 year ago, the British Parliament, you may remember, of course they don't want you to have a memory. They want you stupid, idiotic, not understanding the pattern of development that happens around you.
All right, we
They want you
understand.
following Big Brother, watching house prices rising,
They voted
deciding to try and buy a house in France, Bulgaria, thinking about your holiday for the year, which is wonderful, of course.
Unless you're going
Get
to
pissed
Syria
on a Friday
or
night.
Damascus.
You said a
Get
year
pissed-
ago. What did Parliament do a year ago?
1 year ago, the British Parliament
Voted against
had a
the war.
vote
Yes,
where
against.
David Cameron
And they voted against.
moved hard and he said,
Yes.
we must bomb Syria.
And luckily they said no.
And the Syrians, led by Assad, said,
Yes.
we are fighting Islamic fundamentalists who chop off people's heads. That's what they said.
Well,
They
their
said that
problem.
2 years ago.
Now the
3 years
British,
ago.
are in de facto alliance with Assad.
Yes.
1 year ago, we were going to bomb them. Now we're in alliance with them.
That's called ironic.
Now, if you've ever read 1984, you'll know. One day we're at war with Eurasia, next war we're at peace with Eurasia, in alliance with Eurasia. That is what is happening now. The world balance of forces is changed. The Americans, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, were always saying we're about to bomb Iran. Now, of course, The Iranian government is an ally of Iran, and we are in a de facto alliance with Iran.
Well, that's another problem.
Yet for the last 20 years, we were preparing to bomb Iran.
Yes.
Very peculiar
It is
circumstances
very
again.
peculiar, but
The
what
way the
about
world
Muslim
is
problem?
turning upside down. And it spins so
We
fast,
can't do anything about them. There's too
you're not
many of
supposed to
them.
recognise it.
What's their problem?
They tell you, this is the way it works, of course.
Let Saudi Arabia.
Because there are different ways of looking at the world. You know, am I standing still? Well, I'm moving around a little bit. But am I standing still? No, I'm moving at 800 miles an hour.
Yes.
Because the Earth is spinning at 800 miles an hour. And we in the galaxy are moving 1,000,000 miles a day.
That's Monty Python.
Yes, that's correct, it's
Yes,
Monty Python.
very clever.
And the world we live in is Monty Python-esque, unless you understand it. The internal dynamics of the system. Why are we going to war? It's nothing to do with beheadings.
And it's nothing to do with us either. It's a Muslim problem that they
My friend,
sorted out
my friend,
themselves.
it is also nothing to do with
What are we
Muslims.
going to do with those pesky
It is
Muslims?
also nothing to do with
We sold
Muslims.
themselves out. We
The
sold
British
You
government
need the oil. That's why.
turned round and said, it's not just oil, my friend. My friend,
No, you won't get it. You're running
They've got
out.
to sell it to someone.
one of the major factors in the modern world,
You want control of its
How come the
production.
oil price hasn't gone
a
up?
lot of people say is oil.
Why else were they
Oil is
continually
important.
involved in Iraq?
Gas is important,
Very important.
but it's not the only thing in the world.
He's very good.
For example, as you will, just one second. As you will know, since the last few years, there's been a large-scale campaign by the oil and gas industry to organise fracking in Britain and in America.
Yes.
In a few years' time, America will be self-sufficient in gas as a result of fracking. Probably Britain will be as well. So, the argument about oil is no longer, or oil and gas is no longer as strong as it was.
Correct.
But there is a world struggle for power between countries and between regions and between rising powers who have recognized that the United States era of global domination is coming to an end.
Quite right.
And in those circumstances, peoples all around the world, governments all around the world, social, political and military movements and terrorist forces all around the world would be willing to say, stuff you. The first thing they wanted, the ISIS people, what do you think they want? Bin Laden was no fool.
Bin
And
Laden's not
and
ISIS.
these people from IS are also no fools.
Al-Qaeda's against ISIS. So don't quite
They
put
are
it on.
gloating at the fact that Britain is starting to drop bombs.
Exactly.
They want Britain to stop bombs.
Exactly.
And of course, tomorrow morning, I use that as an analogy, tomorrow morning, later this year, later this month, later this week, early next year, when bombs go off in England, and people's heads are chopped off on the tube stations in England, and people's heads are chopped off in Bradford and dumped in rubbish bins or stuck on pikes, and someone leaves a message, the Islamic State, thanks for bombing us, you will know why that has happened.
No, yes.
And that will happen.
Of course it will. So
Of course.
what are you going to do about it? Get the Muslims to sort it out, not us, okay? We should give them support. You're quite right.
Because, sorry?
Why they were not aware about Muslim in Bosnia? They were killed for 9 years in a row. Every day they are killing him. Because there are too much trees there, and they have too much tree here, they don't care. But if there was an oil there, they will care about Muslims.
Well, I think we're talking
They are
about...
not going for Muslims, or for humanity, or for justice. They are going for oil. Power, only power.
The truth of the matter was, the war in Bosnia was not about oil, you're quite correct, it was about world power. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the collapse of Yugoslavia, the world powers were interested in battling each other. The Europeans were trying to gain a foothold in Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe, particularly Germany, which orchestrated the breakup of Yugoslavia and seized enclaves, for example, Slovenia and Croatia. And an agreement was made, for example, between the British government under John Major and the German government under Chancellor Kohl at the time, that we would opt out of the social rights of the European Union in exchange for recognising Croatia. The French had their own interests in Yugoslavia, They were partly backing the Serbs, but later they wanted war in alliance with Germany against the Yugoslavians, or the Serbs as it was at the time. The Americans jumped in to back the Bosnians, back the Croatians. They organised something called Operation Storm, not Desert Storm, Operation Storm, in which they orchestrated a bombing of Sarajevo marketplace and then ran a campaign. It was administered by American military advisors to get the Croatian army to intervene in Bosnia. Now, thereafter, the American objective was not to defeat the Bosnians, Karadzic and so on. The objective of the Americans was to undermine the Europeans inside Europe. That was the objective. And part of the objective, what we are seeing now in Iraq and Syria, is a battle between the European powers. The same thing happened in Ukraine, don't forget. Don't forget, remember, the Senator of State for the United States of America, Newland, her name was,
Are you okay?
a few months ago.
I just want to weak.
Take a seat, man, somewhere. Take a
Ginny,
seat.
Ginny, there's a bench over there. Shall I walk you over there? Have a sit down for 5 minutes.
I'm enjoying him. Could I borrow your ladder?
It's not very stable. You
won't
might
go-
want to sit down on the floor, my friend. Lie down on the floor, my friend. Just one second. I was going to say, Secretary of State Newland turned around and said, you may remember this, when the Maidan protests were organised, turned around and said on the telephone, you know what? Fuck the Europeans. That was the American attitude to their closest ally. Fuck the Europeans. Why do they say fuck the Europeans? Because Germany stands to gain from Ukraine far more than America gains from Ukraine. What can America gain? Germany's on the border with Ukraine. 1/3 of the Ukrainian population earn less than $1 a day. Germany can send companies to Ukraine, extract resources from Ukraine, employ workers from Ukraine for $1 a day. Not only that, but even when you pay the workers in Ukraine, they will try and transfer their money back to Germany because it's safer in Germany than Ukraine. So you get the resources, the labour, and the money that you give them in the first place. And in that way, Ukraine would become subordinate to German and European interests. Because Ukraine is a useful source. After all, it was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union in the past. It could provide food for the whole of Western Europe. It provided food in the past for the whole of the Soviet Union. And therefore, Germany has a strategic interest in Ukraine. And so they weren't concerned that there were 4 fascists openly declaring their support for Adolf Hitler and the Nazis inside the Ukrainian government. Sorry, you're going to say?
You don't answer this question.
That's much better, Mark. Good luck.
This is a mic. Oh, you want me to speak by the mic? Oh, he can listen to it. My question, please. As long as we know and hear that United States is behind the world freedom and they like humanity to spread around the world, why they were not interested when 7 million people was killed in Bosnia and for 20,000 killed by ISIS, all the world is against that. Why? This is people and this is donkeys or animals or what?
I think I'm trying to explain that there is a fundamental change in the world balance of power taking place at the moment. And to understand that is more important as to locate your position and the political dynamics of the day than it is to go on about American dominance and American control. America is a waning world power.
Oh, come on.
The fact that it's a waning world power, is the fundamentally most important question to understand today. That is why I'm emphasizing that point. Because that is what is creating the internal dynamics of explosive contradictions
I hate explosions.
between many different countries. I mean, even Denmark, for God's sake. Denmark,
Danish butter.
even they are going to Iraq,
Why not?
right? So,
Have a sizzling good
so
time.
the only comparative example you can give would be the precursor to the First World War. Because here you have many powers with contradictory interests, shifting alliance by the minute.
But it's good for
By the
fun,
minute.
isn't it?
If the Americans think, like you heard the British, sorry, before the American, you heard the British former Foreign Secretary, Malcolm Rifkin no less, and the head of the British Army from 1 year ago. Both of them 2 weeks ago declared,
Both of them ex.
we must make an alliance with Assad. 2 weeks ago they said that.
Real.
1 year ago they said we must bomb Assad. Now they say we must make an alliance with Assad.
Of course.
Now, to have such a rapidly changing dynamic of international political relations and international correlations of power, that is the indicator of the most dangerous world situation we've been at since the First World War.
Loads of money to be made, folks.
The fact of the matter
Are you
is,
talking about World
Ladies
War?
and gentlemen,
I'm not talking about World War,
Why not?
but I'm describing the internal dynamics that we are seeing. Now, the fact of the matter is, World War,
Heiko, he's been trying for 20
was
minutes.
prevented by the relationship of power between the Soviet Union and America. That relationship collapsed when America gained dominance after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But that itself concealed, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, concealed the relative decline of America since the Second World War, and the rise of Europe, and now the rise and conquest by China of the world economy. This year, China overtakes America. That will fundamentally alter the world balance of power. If you want to see proof of that, look at Africa. 1896, the British and the Europeans divided up Africa and plundered the whole continent for a century, without raising the standard of living, leaving people in poverty, in squalor and starvation. So that even when television arrived, we could turn on our tellies and watch millions starve in Ethiopia. And Bob Geldof had to come to the rescue with a Hyde Park song. But still, they starved. Only in the last 10 years, when the Chinese state intervened economically in Africa, has the complete continent been transformed. Been transformed.
If the Chinese economy does overtake and the BRIC companies decide to abandon the dollar in the trade with oil, will that not be the final nail in the American imperialist system?
American imperialism has domination in the dollar, in the sense that 2/3 of world trade are organized in dollars. They also have, through this dollar control, they have control over world markets. Most importantly, from their point of view, they have control over shipping lanes. 50%, if you like, of 50% of the world naval power is American naval power. And that naval power dominates the transportation of goods around the world, what we call world trade. So, for example, if you want to go to Primark and go shopping, or you want to go and buy something in Oxford Street, it's entirely dependent upon 3,000 ships that circulate the earth every 24 hours. These ships move the resources produced by the workers of the world to the shops and to the factories of the world. Now, those 3,000 ships are protected, in inverted commas, by American naval might and military power. Now, for the moment, that remains predominant. But the Chinese are building high-speed railways. You know, they talk about high-speed railway in England. They're going to build a high-speed railway between London and Birmingham. The Chinese are going to build it on behalf of the British. The Chinese are building high-speed railways from Beijing to London. According to their plans, by 2026, before the Birmingham-London line is opened, there will be a line from Beijing to London which will leave London on Monday and arrive on Thursday. Now, they are also building, or planning to build, in the next 10 years, a railway tunnel under the sea between Vladivostok and Alaska. That railway will go from China to Washington. In this way, the Chinese will replace shipping with rail networks, high-speed rail networks, that will massively undercut the shipping time of world shipping trade and thereby destroy the influence of the American Navy by economic transportation means. And in this way, the rise of China will undermine American military power by economic means. Will the Americans tolerate it without organising conflict in Southeast and East Asia? Why do you think the conflict in Korea goes on and on and on? Why do you think there's a conflict between Southeast Asian countries and China over deserted islands? Why do you think there's a conflict between Japan and China over an empty island? Because it is not over an empty island. It is because Japan is an ally of America. It's because Taiwan is an ally of America. Why do you look on television this morning? You see protests in Hong Kong. Who do you think organised them? You think they come out the blue? A few students believing they should change? They are orchestrated by the Americans to try and promote a campaign inside China to say we want democracy for all of China. Then, of course, China would break apart, like the Soviet Union did. Tibet would break away, Xinjiang would break away, Mongolia would break away, Sichuan might break away, Guangdong might break away. And in this way you'd return to the pre-1949 situation, where America dominated a weak Chinese government. That's the objective of the Americans. Sorry? I'm not blaming the Americans. I'm describing the weakening of American power and the current balance of world forces. I'm not blaming, I'm describing.
But madam, it's very enjoyable to blame the Americans.
I said the Americans have an alliance. I'm describing why they do what they do and why they are no longer able to do what they used to do. That is why I'm disagreeing with those people who come up to Speaker's Corner, quite understandably, understanding the past events, and say it's about oil. The Americans want to get this, the Americans want to get that. I don't agree. The Americans is a falling, declining power. That's what I'm arguing.
Brzezinski pointed out about American primacy in the late 70s when he brought down Russia and split Russia up. The reason they're in the Middle East is because it's been arranged so they can keep their primacy.
Well, this is what I'm arguing against. Did you hear what the gentleman said? The gentleman said quite correctly. The gentleman here said quite correctly that American power, the leading theoretician for many years, particularly in relation to Soviet power, was Brzezinski. He was a genius from the point of view of world diplomacy and world politics and economics inside the American administration. And he was the only one of the American administration who predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union. But his prediction about American position in the Middle East now is wrong. Now it's wrong because the Americans are being driven out. That's what we're seeing. This gang of thugs who have taken over a section of Iraq and Syria. They're not taking over because they're clever. They're not taking over because they're astute. They're taking over because the other side is internally collapsing. That's the point.
No, because they fancy the opportunity.
You see, even in America, look in the United States of America, city like Wisconsin. 2 years ago, Wisconsin, 100,000 people in Wisconsin from the public sector, policemen, firemen, ordinary working people who believe in the American dream, demonstrating against the government, demanding change. What? No, you look at Ferguson. There you see how the American government responds when people protest at certain levels. Because in Ferguson, they kill someone, and there it was the poorest of the poor, not the workers, but the poorest of the poor. And when they rise up Then all of a sudden the American state starts bringing out the weapons and shooting people. That's how democracy looks as well.
State troops.
What? My friend. Don't forget, when the Americans went to Iraq, they took down the Saddam Hussein statue with a tank, declared it a people's revolt. And then there was looting of all the treasures of 5,000 years of civilization. The Americans sat back like that. What looting? The American is the number one. The American historically, in the last 100 years, the number one looter of the entire world. The Americans themselves are looted. 85 individuals in the world own more wealth than half of the world's population. Who's looting? 85 individuals, less people than here,
30 years old.
own more wealth than half of the bloody world. And then they turn around and say about looting? Looting when someone goes and steals. There was a woman, for example, you remember when the Los Angeles riot, not Los Angeles, when the New Orleans riots broke out, when the flood barriers broke because they couldn't be bothered to invest in them. The levee finally broke. I mean, Led Zeppelin had been singing about that 20 years. Yeah? Still, they couldn't reinforce the levee. There were black people left in the stadium. Someone was seen. Some people were eaten by crocodiles, swimming in the water. The American government did nothing to save those people. And then someone swam through the water, stealing a television. Look, if you can steal a television, carry it in the water and swim, you deserve a frigging medal, right? Not a bloody condemned as a looter. But the Americans have gone around historically and bombed the whole world and stolen the resources of the planet. And that, of course, that legacy, everybody in many parts of the world remember. You think the Egyptian people don't remember what happened? They backed Mubarak. They supported Mubarak. He got $60,000 million stolen from the people. He got $2,000 million a year in arms trade support from the Americans. I've got friends from Iraq and Iran. A friend of mine from Iran. A friend of mine from Iran. He was imprisoned under the Shah for fighting against the Shah. The Americans backed the Shah 100%, as did the British. And then he was in prison. He was in prison in a prison that was made by the British, built by the British. When Bin Laden was hiding in the mountains, in Tora Bora, during those 10 years we were supposed to be hunting him for September 11th.
How was he able to cycle away?
He was hiding in the mountains in tunnels built by the Americans for him to hide in when he was fighting the Soviet Union. So these are historical backgrounds, but we should not mistake the historical background of world position of power of the Americans with historical decline of America, which is what we are witnessing now. That will fundamentally shift the political correlation around the entire world. And what we have seen, my friend, this is a fact of life. This is the world we are living and experiencing. The important thing is to understand what is happening.
He supports homosexuality.
To understand. And once you understand the process, instead of turning like the gentleman did a while ago, said the Muslims to blame. Leave the Muslims to fight each other. Instead of blaming the Muslim, or blaming the Iraqi, or blaming the Syrian, or blaming the American, or blaming the Chinese, you need to understand, dissect the structure of society. We live in a world society, world production, world cooperation in the production of goods. Every single one of us, you reach in your pocket, you have a connection to the entire planet. That didn't exist 20 years ago. Half of the population of China have a broadband internet connection. Half of the population. The entire world is interconnected. And yet, we live in the primitive state of psychology, a primitive state of life, a primitive economic condition. So people, even in a country like Britain, and in a city as wealthy as Britain, don't forget, London, was the #1 capitalist power right back in 1650, right? And yet, people struggle to pay their rent. People struggle to pay their gas bill, their electricity bill. They had to think, am I going to buy baked beans today Or shall I get Heinz baked beans or Sainsbury's Basics? Because I need to save a few pennies so I can go out and get a pint of lager tonight, right? That after 400 years of capitalism, in which British imperialism had a fifth of the surface of the planet and a fifth of the world's population under its domination. And yet you can't buy electricity, gas and rent, and people can't afford to have housing in London. Well, imagine what it's like in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, India. In India, a third of the population remain untouchables. 60 years, 60 years, 60 years after so-called independence. Sorry?
From their mentality.
Their mentality.
No. Listen. I'm not being disrespectful. From what I understand, that the Indians themselves do not want those untouchable people.
As I said, you need to understand. You want to find out what the Indians do, get your mobile phone out, look up on Facebook a load of Indian people, start writing to them and ask them. Instead of like imagining, just make 100 friends today on Facebook in India, different parts, pick Mumbai, pick Bombay, pick Delhi, pick 10 people randomly. Randomly, say you like to be their friend or something, and join some forum, Indian society, Indian IT workers, Indian service workers, Indians who like to speak English, talk to them, spend a week doing it, and you'll know what they think.
I do speak
better than you do now.
Up Barclays Bank.
True. Or do that.
Is it not true also that we live in an infinitely more dangerous world? For example, the Chinese recently gave up their no first strike policy. They now have a first strike policy against the United States. And they also have joint military exercises with the Russians and with the Iranians. And they have a secret pact that if any of them are attacked, the others will retaliate against America. So
it is exactly as I said. We are entering a period similar to the period before the First World War. And for that reason, alliances and correlations between various forms of power will shift by the day. You know, just before the First World War broke out, the rulers of Europe didn't think there would be a war, right?
So is there going to be a world war?
I didn't say there's going to be a world war.
But you're not saying there isn't.
We are seeing, I'm not saying there's not going to be either.
There
right?
you go. So there is going to be.
I don't believe it's likely at the moment. But the international contradictions that gave rise to the First World War are very similar to what we're seeing today.
So there is going to be
the fall of British power. British imperialism was the #1 imperialism in the world. It was confronted by an industrial power capable of outstripping Britain, but was not yet outstripped Britain, and did not have control over world trade. So, where's the parallel? Germany was an industrial powerhouse. In a few years after 1914, had there not been a war, Germany would have overtaken Britain. As it was, Britain and Germany, this is in the European sphere, Britain and Germany were locked into conflict. The Americans were outside of the whole game at that time. So that contradiction gave birth to the alliances breaking down and breaking out into a war that lasted for 4 years, killed millions of people, and gave rise to the Russian Revolution and the transformation of world history.
But now we've got nuclear weapons, and there are nutcases that are determined to use
Tell
them.
us about it.
I saw a recording of Nixon saying that he was prepared to use nuclear weapons against the Chinese and against the Vietnamese.
My purpose, that's why when you ask me World War, nuclear weapons, my purpose is not to doom-monger and scare people. My purpose is to explain.
It's too late.
Understanding the world we live in
You've ruined
is the
our
precondition. You are the one coming out with World War. The precondition is understanding. Once you have an understanding, then you yourself can investigate and conclude, draw the conclusion, and act on those conclusions.
What do we do with raised awareness?
The first thing here is to campaign against the British. One issue now, campaign against the British action in Iraq and Syria. But more than that is the internal conflict in Britain. What was revealed in Scotland was actually not a nationalist vote. The people who go and see Rose of Scotland and so on, it's a small minority in Scotland. That's not what shifted the vote to the point where they were about to win. And they only lost because of campaign and manipulation by big business and by all the political parties lying through their teeth, right? They turned around and said, we'll offer you, the Scottish, so much independence, they won't even need independence. One day later, David Cameron came on television and he said, England's going to have independence. That's what he said. That was the reality, what he said. He said Westminster votes for English affairs will be made by English politicians. That's what he said. Which means, without a referendum, England is declaring independence in Britain. That's what's happened. That's what happened last week. Without any referendum, without any discussion, David Cameron decided it. Now what does that mean? It means Scotland becomes a dependent territory of England. That's what it means. And of course, that will eventually lead to Scottish independence. But it will be a much more conflictual independence than would have happened had there been independence declared last week. So, the idea that this conflict is about nationalism, it's not. It's about social and economic rights. In Scotland, you have education for free. In Scotland, you get medicine for free. And the Scots said, we've got it better in Scotland than they have in England. And unfortunately, England has a built-in Tory majority, or UKIP majority, of course. And therefore what will happen is, gradually they'll take away the welfare state in Scotland. That was behind the vote in Scotland. That was the fundamental. Why people voted for independence. They lost, but they only just lost. And they only lost because Gordon Brown and co came on television and lied through his teeth. He turned round and said, I got the exact quotation. He said, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. And then he said, that is the fundamental principle on which Britain is built. And then he went like this. I looked at the video 3 times yesterday. He went like this. Knowing fully well he had completely and utterly mystified the facts and falsified them. Because he knows, he studied politics, economics and philosophy. I believe it was at Oxford University, right? He knows very well that from each according to his ability to each according to his needs is the most famous quotation of Karl Marx of communism. What a communist society will be. A society with no money, where there's no compulsion to work, and where you give what you want. That's what Marx said is the highest phase of communism. Actually comes from Louis Blanc.
Sounds like Monaco.
And yet, Gordon Brown said that was the objective, that was the mission of Britain. The mission of Britain. So in other words, he was consciously lying to the population. Now, if someone consciously lies in a court case, that's considered perjury. They go to jail for perjury. But if Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of England, consciously lies to swing an electoral vote in Britain, that's called clever political rhetoric. Clever political rhetoric. And just, if you like, just to show you how clever the political rhetoric was, he said, Britain unifies the world. Next week, Britain bombs the world. 1 week later.
These various competing political, military and economic blocs, why is it that they cannot have a different mindset in which when a country becomes rich, it helps other countries become. So, for example, America is partly rich because China has become richer. Yes. Because Japan has become richer, China has become richer, because China has become Japan, and so on. If Africa becomes richer, it helps the rest of the world. Why cannot them change their mindset?
Make other countries rich is because the country is an anachronism from an earlier era in human history. Every one of us has something that we use every day that connects us all around the planet. Every single second of the day. In fact, unfortunately, although we use it and like to use it for connecting with other people around the world, it's actually used to spy on us, right? It's used to steal from us and to spy on us. That's the purpose of it. The NSA revelations, the GCHQ revelations are completely explicit about this. The British security services illegally record everyone you connect to in the world. They record everyone connects to in the world. And then they say, well, they don't know who Jihadi John is. And they don't know where these people are. But they want to know everything you do. And then they harvest everything you do. It's a commodity, you see. If I send a message and say, I'm interested in buying a video camera, suddenly a camera advertisement appears on my screen. Right? It's a product. What I know and what I do every time I type is a product that I unwittingly give to them. Or better said, that they illegally steal from me and from all of us. That power of knowledge is used against us. That's why Leon Trotsky was right when he said, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. War is a battle for power, resources, economic wealth, and productive power. Now, war is fundamentally business by other means. Now, you asked about nations. The nation is an anachronism. Once upon a time, when human beings left Africa, or early hominids left Africa 1.8 million years ago, they left Africa with one passport. That was an axe that allowed them to move around the world. The axe enabled them to conquer the world. Now,
You were intelligent.
the instruments we have now allow us to contact and communicate around the world. And yet the actual thing we travel with is not this, but is your passport. A little piece of paper where some guy looks out on the border. Now, of course, if you've got £1 million, they don't look at your passport. You can have a passport anywhere in the world. You can buy a passport from anywhere in the world. If you're poor, you don't get a passport. You jump in a boat, you try to travel from Africa to Italy, someone rams the boat, 500 people are drowned, right? That's the reality of so-called nation states. Half of the world earns less than $2 a day. And yet 85 people own more wealth than half of the world's population. 780 companies own or control 2/3 of world trade. 40% of world trade is controlled by 140 super entities, super companies, which dominate the entire flow of capital around the world at astronomical scale. You're talking about trillions of dollars every day circulating the world in search of the most rapid profit. And of course, they think they can make money out of nothing. They can make money out of, make money out of exploiting the worker, make money out of child labour, make money out of millions of people working in factories and exploiting them, make money out of, buses, make money out of cars, make money out of drugs, you name it. And yet, the easiest way to make money is to circulate money around the world without production. That's why unemployment's been rising. That's why poverty's been rising. And that's why the conflict between the nations and the conflict inside the nations is also escalating. So I say public ownership of the largest companies in the world, democratic control, and we can run it through the internet. There's a company floated on the stock market last week, Alibaba. They have connections to all the productive activity across the whole of China. China now produces 20 or 30% more industrial products than America. When we go to the shops here, half of the goods we go and buy in the shops are made in China, manufactured in China. So in other words, that internet connection between production and the consumer does not require a middleman, does not require the companies that claim they're the great brands. Tesco was in trouble last week. Selfridges, McDonald's. We do not require these intermediaries. If we take the largest companies into public ownership, including Google, Facebook, Alibaba, Amazon.com, eBay.com, the Deutsche Bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, the National Westminster Bank, the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, HSBC, to those who don't know what its origin is, Lloyd's Bank, even just by having the banks, not only in public ownership, but under democratic control. So the investment is carried out according to the needs and aspirations of the population. We could reorganize the planet to serve the needs of the people. Peace, freedom, plenty, in harmony with the ecology. Not in one country, but across the entire planet. Not a 48 or a 50-hour working week, but a 20-hour working week. Not education at £9,000 a year, but universal education from birth until death, available to all, provided through the internet, provided by real communication, provided by real meetings of human beings, to bring together humanity into line with modern communications, modern technology, modern science, modern productive technique, modern agriculture, and to create a world worthy of being called or being lived in by human beings. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. Anybody likes to take